Okay, so we're looking at the idea of this week of accepting the refiner's fire. And that is the idea of accepting the judgments that God has made. Sometimes He makes judgments against us. Sometimes related to that would relate to punishment. Sometimes the judgments are that He's going to allow certain things to happen, and we are going to sometimes suffer because of that. And so that all this relates to that. It specifically relates to the idea of judgments of God, the judgment that He has had many times on many nations, and we're looking forward to that one time at the end of time when Jesus returns and we have the judgment again. But we should never think that there are no judgments until that time. God does judge nations, He judges people, and sometimes things happen because of that particular thing. But in doing that, we need to recognize that those judgments and the things that happen to us are intended to make us stronger so that we can develop an unwavering conviction about Him. And if we don't see it properly, we're going to see those times of judgment or even times of difficulties. It might pull us away from God instead of pulling us to God. And if the result of our pain is to pull us away from God, then we've missed the point completely. And it can actually make us stronger, even stronger than we were before. And there is no such thing as growth without pain. It's impossible to grow without pain. It's going to be there. And it may be mental, it may be emotional, it may be physical, but always there's going to be some kind of pain. But we also need to remember that God is always right in His judgments. So we trust God in the process and remember that He is the one who is in control. He is not the one who causes everything, but He is the one who allows things, and He can use those things to our advantage for His glory. So that's one of the things we can see in the book of Judges, in Ruth, and in 1 Samuel, the first 13 chapters. And we're going to talk about those some things out of those sections that will help give us an idea of what is happening in this section, right? In these sections. So the four major themes in this reading was the consequences of moral decay and spiritual decline. We see that tremendously, especially at the end of the book of Judges. 19 through 21 is horrific. We also see God's sovereignty during human failings. We see the importance of faithful obedience and commitment to God, and then we have God's providential care and redemptive purposes that are explained. So God is always trying to bring people closer to Him, and whatever it takes for that to happen, He's going to do it. If it's according to His will or according to His character and personality of God. All right, so Judges 19 through 21, quick overview. We have a great example of the moral decline that's going on in Israel at the time. Remember, a key phrase that's used in that book is there were no kings in Israel at this time. And it's partly to, I think, support what we're going to see in 1 Samuel of the idea that they need a king, or at least the argument that they need a king, but also as a reminder, they weren't organized like they were later with a king, but they were organized in accordance with God's will. Who were the ruling people outside of the judges? How was society organized and structured, or supposed to be? By the tribes, And who was providing leadership for the people of Israel? They didn't have a king. The priests, yes. There was quite a bit of effort from the priests to help educate and teach, and that's who they were supposed to be following because they were the ones who God set aside to instruct Israel. And in fact, they had from what I understand, I don't know if it's going on at this time, but they had a big program of education for the people of Israel, and they tried their best. So one of the reasons that everyone was supposed to come to Jerusalem at least 3 times a year was for that very thing. They could receive instruction and they can go back home, and they had different people. But also we have the structure that Moses set up. Remember, he also set up a structure for people who would be judges over 50s and hundreds and multitudes of people. So there's a little bit of social structure there as well, but evidently it was falling apart or it wasn't being implemented are supported at all. So there's so much bad that can happen when society begins to crumble. People have no law, and things get pretty bad. So we see that in the book of Judges, 19 through 21. We'll talk about that. Then we have the book of Ruth. That's sometime during the time frame of the Judges, and we don't know exactly when, but it is part of the time frame. And it shows us that even in the worst of times, there are still good people who want to do what is right and what is good. It's like a breath of fresh air. It's almost like it's so bad with Judges that God said, you need to have a little breather in here. It's not comedic relief. It's beauty relief, I guess you'd say. We have all the ugly, and then we get the beauty of the story of Ruth. And then 1 Samuel 1 through 13 picks up again with the idea of the judges. In fact, Samuel was the last judge, and so he was a judge of Israel, but he also helped bring in the kingdom, King Saul. And then God continued to guide his people through the prophet Samuel, even after Saul was made king. So God was still in control. Even though they wanted a king, God was still trying to lead his people through Samuel. And just because they had a king didn't mean that everyone was going to follow God's laws. It's just that the king had more power to inflict punishments and things like that the priests didn't really carry with them. All right, so we're going to look at some things related to the human condition. The first one is the recognition of sinfulness and the need to take responsibility. That's from Judges 19 through 21. So we're going to look at one of the incidents here. It's actually all one big story here at the end. It's kind of just thrown in at the last. So don't think of this as part of the timeline. The book of Judges is not necessarily written according to a timeline. It's just giving instances of what happened in various places in Israel at the time. So there's a Levite in Ephraim who had a concubine from Bethlehem. And she ran away from Ephraim at some point and ran home. And that man, that Levite, and one of his servants went after her. So that's Judges 19. It says it came in first three verses. It came to pass in those days when there was no king in Israel that there was a certain Levite staying in the remote mountains of Ephraim. He took for himself a concubine from Bethlehem of Judah. But his concubine played the harlot against him and went away from him to her father's house at Bethlehem in Judah, and was there 4 whole months. Then her husband arose and went after her to speak kindly to her and bring her back, having his servant and a couple of donkeys with him. So she brought him into her father's house, and when the father of the young woman saw him, he was glad to meet him. So now it's the first time he's actually met his father-in-law, and the man took him in, which is typical of the day, because they had to allow people to come into their houses. So he stayed several days with him, and then decided that he's going to leave. But it's one of these customs. We've seen this more than once in the Old Testament, where they'll stay a day and they'll say, no, just stay one more night. And so they distract them with food and games and whatever you can think of. And it gets close to night again, and they say, oh, just stay one more night. It's already dark. And so after 3 days of this, the man said, I got to get home. And so he just said, I got to go. So he left late in the day. And by the time they made it to Jerusalem, he had a problem. His servant was saying, it's way too late. We need to stop here in Jerusalem. And Jerusalem was not an Israelite town at the time. They were actually, it was not even called Jerusalem, technically. It was Jebus. And the Jebusites were in there. So the man didn't want to stay there because these are not the people of God. These are not Israelites. So we're going to keep going for a little while. And they came to there was 1 or 2 towns ahead, and they came to the first one and finally decided to stay. And you can see that in verses 4 through 15. So let's just read a few verses of this. His father-in-law, the young woman's father, detained him, and he stayed with him 3 days. So they ate and drank and lodged there. And it came to pass on the 4th day that he rose early in the morning, and he stood apart. But the young woman's father said to the son-in-law, refresh your heart with a morsel of bread, and afterward you go your way. They sat down, and the 2 of them ate and drank together. Then the young woman's father said to the man, please be content to stay all night, and let your heart be merry. And when the man stood to depart, his father-in-law urged him, so he lodged there again. He rose early on the 5th day. I said 3, it was actually 5, evidently, to depart. But the young woman's father said, "Please refresh your heart." So they delayed until afternoon, and both of them ate. And when the man stood to depart, he and his concubine and his servant, his father-in-law, the young man's father, said to him, "Look, the day is now drawing toward evening. Please spend the night. See, the day is coming to an end. Lodge here, that your heart may be merry. Tomorrow go your way, so that you may get home." The man was not willing to spend the night, so he arose and departed and came opposite Jebus, that is Jerusalem. With him were the 2 saddled donkeys. His concubine was also with him. So here they are. They're decided to stay there. The master, in verse 12, the servant was asking the master, let's stay in verse 11. And in verse 12, his master said to him, "We're not going to stay here. We're going to go to the children of Israel. We will go on to Gibeah." That's an important idea, because the reason he didn't want to stay with the Jebusites was because he was afraid of what they would do, of their behaviors, afraid of their moral condition. These are not the people of God. So they decided to go in, and it says in verse 15, they just turned aside there to go into the lodge in Gibeah. And when they went in, he sat down in the open square of the city, for no one would take them into his house or spend the night. It turns out then that an older man came and said, "You can't stay the night here." Man, this is coming back to the book of Genesis so much. Remember when the 2 angels went to Sodom and Gomorrah, and they were standing out in the square, and they said, "We're going to sleep out in the square." And they, "No, you're not doing it." Lot said, "No, you're not doing that. You're going to come with me. This is dangerous." Exact same thing happening. And this is really one of the reasons it's in here. It shows the how bad things had gotten. Remember what happened to Sodom and Gomorrah because of their sinfulness. God struck it down, right? It rained fire and brimstone and destroyed the whole region because of the sins of the people. And we're seeing the exact same thing happening with Israel. The reason that Israel was able to take over the land was what? Why did God give them the land of Canaan? Well, besides the promise that he made to Abraham. Because they were so evil, the Israelites were supposed to go in and kill them all. That's how bad they were. We're talking about children being sacrificed on altars. All kinds of bad things are happening here in this region, in this country. And God said, it's too far. They're too far gone. You're going to have to do something. So he said, "You go in and kill them all. Don't let any of them live or drive them out. If you can't kill them, they're going to drive them out." And they didn't do it. So now they're finding themselves in similar situations. So they went to Gibeah, and they... At that night, men came to the house demanding the Levite be given over to them. They were wanting to rape the man. And he sent out his concubine instead. And they abused her the entire night. And she stumbled back to the house where she had been staying and fell dead on the doorstep. And so this man... He walked out the next morning and saw his concubine there and said, "Hey, get up, we got to go." And she was dead. So this is what I'm saying. It's a terrible situation. And the fact that he would throw her out to the wolves, we would never see that happening. There's all kinds of things that are wrong with this. We have the crowd, the group of men who are wanting to abuse this person, just like we saw in the book in Genesis. And so what he did, if you read 29 through chapter 20 and verse 11, he went in and, well, let's just read it. When he entered his house, he took a knife, laid hold of his concubine, and divided her into 12 pieces, limb by limb, and sent her throughout all the territory of Israel. And so it was that all who saw it said, "No such deed has been done or seen from the day that the children of Israel came up from the land of Egypt until this day. Consider it, confer, and speak up." So all the children of Israel came out from Dan to Beersheba, as well as from the land of Gilead, and the congregation gathered together as one man before the Lord at Mizpah. And the leaders of all the people, all the tribes of Israel, presented themselves in the assembly of the people of God, 400,000 foot soldiers who drew the sword. So now we have a reaction, which... I mean, it took a pretty gruesome thing to get them to react, didn't it? Why hasn't this kind of stuff been stopped before? It's probably not the first time that it's happened. And I'm not talking about the dividing of the girl and sending her in 12 pieces. That's what got their attention. It wasn't the sinfulness of what was going on in that town of Gibeah. It was the fact that basically they opened their mailbox and there was a head in it. That's what caused this huge reaction, which doesn't it show human nature? We put up with things until a certain point, but that point keeps getting further and further away. The more we're used to things, the more we'll put up with. And it shouldn't have ever gotten to this point. It should have already been taken care of. But they decided they're going to do something about this. They decided they have 400,000 foot soldiers who gathered together, and we're going to fix this problem, and they're going to go in and just destroy everything with Gibeah. But they decided to go in by lot, and so they went not all at one time, but each tribe had their opportunity to go in. So there's a lot of routing and defeating, and God didn't allow them to rout them at first. Israel was being destroyed and punished for the sins. So that's what's happening all the way through verse 11. And it ends in verse 11 ends, it says, so all the men of Israel were gathered against the city, united together as one man. And there's a lot more to this account that happens. But I wanted to bring this out because it illustrates a lot of things. So here's some ideas for this. This is an example of the depravity that was going on, and the idea that they had no king. What irony do you see considering where the man decided to lodge for the night? There is an irony there. What is that? Yes. He didn't go to Jebus because he was afraid of them, evidently, and he ended up going to the children of Israel, and this was even worse, right? That's the irony, and that's how bad things were. Right, very good. What was the response of the people who saw the dissected woman?
By the way they gathered together, they were probably either 4 or 5 or generations out of it.
Yeah, they're both. Right. What's going on here, right? He definitely got their attention. I don't suggest that any of us do that today. If you take a dead person, you're going to go to jail for that. But sometimes things have to happen to wake us up and get our attention. And God has a way of doing those things. Anyone remember September 11th, 2001? Was it 2001? Long time ago, wasn't it? We know what happened then. Do you remember how religious everybody got all of a sudden? I mean, everybody was going to church, it seemed like. And we thought, great, we have a great American revival. How long did that last? A couple months. And then the conspiracies started coming out, and this was all fake. It was run by the government, and then everything was just all separated out into people stopped believing in God. They were horrified, mortified for a short time, and nothing really came of it. How many times have you seen that kind of stuff in your life? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
How does that compare to what's going on over there now?
It doesn't. The Israelites were the people of God because God intended to bring the Messiah through them. Once that relationship, or once the Messiah came through them, they were no longer considered the people of God. It's never talked about it in that sense again, except for the fact that they can be people of God just like anyone else can. So at first we had this special people separated out from the world that was called a nation. It was called the nation of God. And they were different from all the worlds. They were protected more by God. All kinds of things, blessings were given to them. But God had fulfilled all of His all of His promises to them by the time long before Jesus came, except for the Messiah. He had fulfilled, by the time the book of Judges was written, He had fulfilled His promise to give them the land. They had the land. They had all the land. And that promise then was fulfilled. Well, if you are promised a car, and you go and use the car and then you give it to someone else, is it right for you to turn around and say, hey, I want my car? You got your car. That's what the Israelites received. They received the land, and they, because of sin, lost it. And God brought them back to their homelands, but that was not related to any promises he had made. They had the promise made forever that it would be their land, but the condition was they had to be his people, and they were not his people. So they lost it. Well, when Jesus came, we have a new covenant, new people. The people of God now are not a physical nation. The people of God are a spiritual nation, that we have the kingdom of God. That's his church. We are the spiritual Israel that exists today. And anyone can be part of that, Jew or Gentile. Yeah. Right. They don't believe in Jesus now. They didn't even when Jesus was there. A lot of them didn't. Yeah. No. They can be God's children if they accept Jesus and are baptized and become a Christian. That's how God sees the world now. It used to be Jew and Gentile. Now it's Christian and non-Christian. That's the way life works. So, yeah, that's a good question. I appreciate it. Now, that doesn't mean that God doesn't have rules in place and protections and things like this for a nation. Just like any other nation, he's going to judge accordingly and according to justice. But he's not doing anything for them because of their status with him. It has everything to do with just like he would treat us. What determines whether or not God blesses this nation? Whether or not we're following God. Yeah. It's righteousness that exalts a nation. Yeah.
The church is called spiritual Israel.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah. And we have to be careful with that because it's a figure of speech. It's not necessarily that we are the Israelites now, because if we were Israelites, we'd be following the law of Moses. We're not Israelites. But in a figure, we are the people of God. So we are the ones who God has promised the blessings to, and eternal life is ultimately what he's promising to them. All right, I hope that clarifies things. What does it tell us about human nature that such a terrible thing had to happen before the people of Israel decided to make a change? Is that human nature? Yeah, we get numb to it. And apathy. Do we have to have such a huge something happen for us to decide we're going to make some changes? No. We just decide, right? We say, I've had enough of this. I'm going to make some changes in my life. We talked about this, I think it was Wednesday. We have this idea that people who are addicted to alcohol or whatever, they have to hit rock bottom before they can make changes. That's not true. In a sense, it's true because what rock bottom is wherever they decide to make the change. We could say that, right? But essentially, they don't have to lose everything in their life before they decide to make a change. They don't have to. Often they will. They'll lose everything, and then they finally start thinking, maybe I shouldn't have this anymore. Look at the cost. But the secret then, it's one thing to get so far down in your life and say, look at what this has cost me and all the stuff that I've lost. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you're going that direction and you decide to make a change, the only way that you're going to make that change without losing everything, in my opinion, is to find something that's more important. So you decide, look at the direction I'm going. I'm not supposed to be, booze shouldn't be my pursuit. God should be my pursuit. If you make that decision, then you can get out of it without having to hit rock bottom. But anyway, it's sad to see sometimes we ruin our own lives. All right, what are some warning signs in our lives that might show that we're drifting from God's standards? We tolerate sin more and more, yeah. What does it mean to tolerate it?
Just kind of not thinking it's bad.
All right, we become desensitized to it. That's an indication that there could be some problems. All right, that's one example of that. What else? What? You're not willing to say anything about it anymore. Yeah, that's a good indication. Maybe it's not quite as bad to make us want to say something about it. All right, in our own mind. Anything else? That's right. If it's in my family or if it's related to me, it's really not that big a deal. And that's kind of the way we see things. I don't know how many people I've met, how many preachers I've known or heard of that they would stand strong against different things, and as soon as their family members got involved, they all of a sudden got quiet about it and didn't want to say anything about it. Well, it doesn't change reality just because your family's a part of it. All right. Now, sometimes people learn that they were saying things inappropriately, but that's not what I'm talking about. Any other thoughts? How can we know if we're drifting? Sorry? Yeah, that's right. We stopped going to church, and I think even before that, we can stop praying, we stop thinking about God as often. That's definitely a sign of drifting. Yeah. Do you think that Israel got to this point where they had a city like this? Do you think it took them a couple years? There's no way. It took a long time and a lot of things happening that people just decided to turn a blind eye to. And who knows how far things will go. Consider, we discussed this one already before, but consider a possible worst case scenario of civil war in this country. How could we prepare to serve others during such times? Now, what I'm asking about here is I'm trying to envision a situation like in the book of Judges, where there's lawlessness. And presumably, if there is a civil war, there's going to be a lot of lawlessness. And with lawlessness comes all kinds of bad things, right? At least the potential for it. So what are steps that we can take to help other people or serve other people during these kinds of times? Right. So you have to build up to it, right? Yeah. So you cultivate that before it happens. That's right. That's what we have to do. This is you can look at the good times as this is when you have the opportunity to practice what you need to practice in the bad times. But we don't usually see it that way. We kind of like, it's good times, I can slack off. That's when the bad times come, right? Were you going to say something?
I think right now in our country, there's a thing against abortion, okay? And there's one party for it and one party against it. At some time, that might lead to a war in our country.
Yeah, there's no telling what could cause that. You're right. It depends on how things go in the country. We definitely see two sides ramping up, and it's pretty obvious for everyone. And it's not getting better; it's getting worse. And I'm not saying that there's going to be a civil war. I'm just thinking worst case scenario. Well, so you prepare in advance. You do the things that we should be doing then. We start doing them now. That's good. Any practical ideas for how you can make sure that you are able to serve other people? What do you have to do in order to be able to serve other people when bad things happen? Oh, okay. We develop humility. Yeah. And attitude. So we develop our trust too, that God will never lead us or forsake us. Yeah. That's right. I would also suggest that we have to learn to get into the lives of other people, right? What we tend to do is especially when hard times come. We circle the wagons, and it's us versus them. Well, during the American Civil War, the church had a big struggle, and there was lots of discussion. How do we get through this in the best way? And there's lots on both sides of the aisle, so to speak, north and south. Preachers were writing all kinds of material, both north and south. And the predominant idea was we need to remember that we are people of peace. That didn't mean that some of them promoted fighting, and there's a lot of political things going on with that. But from what I've seen, there was also a huge discussion that this is a physical battle, but we are in a spiritual battle. And we need to teach peace, and we need to teach what God said. And remember that the people of God, the people are not an enemy of ours. Satan is the enemy, and we try our best to help other people. And I don't know if that was a prevailing idea, but I did see some of that in some of the literature, and I've not read all of it by any means. I think that we have to consider the fact that we are so caught up in our lives most of the time that we don't have room for anyone new. We don't have room for anybody else to be added, or any way for anyone else to be added, because we go to the same places, see the same people, and we never interact with anyone outside of our normal circle. Well, that's human nature, but if we're going to be the kind of people who are reaching out, we got to find a way to figure out how to put more people into our interactions. And that's a challenge. I think it's something that we should all do. What did Jesus do to get into the lives of different people? He went from place to place meeting people. He healed people. He was preaching and teaching in all kinds of different places. He went from place to place to place doing those kinds of things. And I'm not suggesting that we have to give up everything and go from city to city. That's not the point at all. The point is he got into people's lives, and he went around healing people. Did he do that all the time? Absolutely. All the time. They came to him from out of the woodwork. So what is the idea here is, what is your healing, so to speak? None of us can go around healing people, but we all have something we can do to help people. So what do we do? What are we doing with it? And that's something that we have to think through. What am I doing with the opportunities and talents that God has given to me in my life? And can I say that it has impacted anyone else around me? If our talents and skills and abilities don't actually impact anyone else around us, what do we have them for? Just for ourselves? Of course not. We are supposed to be using them somehow to the benefit of others. And that doesn't mean that we're going to have thousands of people that we're interacting with. It may be one or two more people that you meet. Well, meet one or two people in the next 6 months. And then after that, meet one or two more people in the next 6 months. It doesn't have to be massive. Just get into people's lives. I think that we have to start doing that now, because later on, if there's really bad things happening, we're going to have so much opportunity to get into people's lives. But here's the thing to remember. If we're in civil war or threatening of it, what is everyone else going to be doing? What kind of attitude are they going to have? They're going to have the circle of the wagons attitude. They're not going to trust anybody except the people they already know. If you already know them, you're going to have more of a chance of influencing them than if you have no idea who they are. That's just the way reality works. So while the things are going well, we prepare for the times when they're not going to go very well. And this is one of the lessons we can see in the book of Judges. This is what they never got. When things were going well for them, what did they start doing? They started forgetting God. Instead of doing even more for God, they started forgetting God and taking it easy, and I don't have to worry about anything now. Things are going well. And then oppressors came. Why did the oppressors come? Because they started slipping into sin. So we do that same thing if we're not careful. All right, so related to plans, this is kind of already answered. Related to plans and steps about the worst case scenario, should these be considered and implemented in our own current conditions? Yeah, obviously we should. We should be looking at how we can behave in such a way to bring the most glory to God. All right, any thoughts or comments or questions? Yeah.
So something that you created. Bottom line, you created this thing, and you're thinking this thing that you created is going to be the thing that saves you.
Yeah.
I think as a matter of perspective, we have to understand that the government that we live under is a government of our own creation. That we cannot expect our government to be the one to save us, no matter which side of the aisle you stand on. At the end of the day, if you treat the government like it's going to be the one to save us, whether we're Republican or Democrat,
Yeah.
then you are treating that government like an idol. You are laying down your life to worship that thing, fight for that thing. It's not going to do much for you.
That's a good point. You know, the rest of the world looks at us and says, well, why are y'all so involved in politics? It's not really going to help your country. And they're speaking from centuries of experience, and we just have a couple hundred years, right? Well, there is some good things that the government can do, and there are some good things that we want to promote, sure, but we need to remember there is no savior of this country outside of God. He's the only one that can do it. So, yeah, that's a good point. All right, let's talk about the book of Ruth. We've got 5 minutes to cover 4 chapters. We're not going to cover it all. Just wanted to look at the first 17 verses of chapter 1. And this is Ruth's loyalty to Naomi. So this is, in verse 1, it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled that there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to dwell in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech. The name of his wife was Naomi. The names of his 2 sons were Machlon and Chilion, Ephrathites of Bethlehem, Judah. And they went to the country of Moab and remained there. Then Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. And they took wives of the women of Moab. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other was Ruth. And they dwelt there about 10 years. Then both Machlon and Chilion also died, so the woman survived her 2 sons and her husband. And she arose with her daughters-in-law, that she might return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the country of Moab that the Lord had visited his people by giving them bread. Therefore she went out from the place where she was, and her 2 daughters-in-law with her, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. And Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, go return each to her mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you, as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you may find rest, each and in the house of her husband. So she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. And they said to her, surely we will return with you to your people. But Naomi said, turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Are there still sons in my womb, that they may be your husbands? Turn back, my daughters, go, for I am too old to have a husband. If I should say I have hope, if I should have a husband tonight and should also bear sons, would you wait for them till they were grown? Would you restrain yourselves from having husbands? No, my daughters, for it grieves me very much for your sakes that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me. They lifted up their voices and wept, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. And she said, look, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law. But Ruth said, entreat me not to leave you or turn back from following after you. For wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts you and me. All right, so here we see her loyalty that's she's renowned for, actually. According to any laws, was Ruth required to follow Naomi? There was no burden. There was no marriage anymore. Her husband had died. There's no tie there legally from that. Why do you think that she didn't want to leave? It's got to be the love, yeah. There may be other explanations. There wasn't much hope of her having children, of her having a husband from her, right? There was something. She wanted to take care of Naomi, or there was a good relationship there, or whatever. I wonder how many daughters-in-law and mothers-in-law have that kind of relationship, or even sons-in-law and fathers-in-law, right? I mean, sons and fathers-in-law. Those kinds of things don't happen. Any other thoughts? Why she wouldn't want to leave? All right, so she recognized Naomi's plight of being a widow, and yeah, so she thought, well, somebody can help. That's a good observation. She also said that she's going to follow her gods, right? Your God will be my God. And I don't know if she said gods, plural, but we know that the other one turned back and went to her gods. End of verse 16, your people shall be my people, and your God my God. So it's possible that she didn't want to go back. Maybe she knew something about God and didn't want to go to the false gods. Maybe she recognized that God was doing something in Israel because it says that they found out that God was giving them bread to eat. Maybe she's decided to trust God in this situation. There's no telling. But there had to be something about Naomi for Ruth to react that way. And there had to be something about Ruth for her to behave that way. So, all right. So Wednesday, we're going to talk a little bit more about this. Good discussion. Thank you.